So our topic for today is demand shifters. And remember, guys, demand shifters are those ceteris paribus assumptions that we talked about. But we probably need to take a look back of two things that we've already covered that seem to cause people a little trouble. So we're going to do just a little bit of review, then we're going to go on and talk about the demand shifters. So the first thing that I want to review for everyone is the difference between demand and quantity demanded. And remember, I said that I'm going to be very literal. I'm going to be very precise. I'm not going to confuse the two. I'm not going to use them interchangeably. So get in the habit of referring to demand with a D, capital D, and quantity demanded is going to be QD. So remember, guys, when we're talking about demand, we're talking about behavior of consumers over a range of prices. So behavior of consumers over a range of prices. So this is what we talked about earlier, kind of this if-then idea. So remember, when we're drawing demand, we always put price on the vertical axis, and we always put quantity on the horizontal axis. And so if we're talking about demand, we're talking about this whole relationship. So remember, demand is a demand curve. It might be linear as I've drawn it here, but we call it a demand curve. So this is a demand curve. And we notice that a demand curve maps together price and quantity over a range of prices. So a demand curve maps together price and quantity over a range of prices. So the emphasis, again, remember, is on the range of prices. And we see that range of prices right here. It's not going to let me write anything, but you see that range of prices. So that's why it's kind of an if-then statement. Quantity demanded is only used when we're talking about being at a particular price. So if we're at a particular price, it's not a range, but there's an actual specific price. Now we're talking about quantity demanded, all right? So we're talking about consumer behavior at a particular price. So we might say at a price of $5, quantity demanded equals 200. So we're talking about consumer behavior at a particular price. And we can also illustrate this. So let's draw another demand curve. And you see that I'm labeling them each time, right? I don't just draw a line and leave it there and not label what it is. So I'm saying D. It might be D0, D1, if I have multiple demand curves as they shift. All right, so how would I illustrate this situation where we're at a price of 5 and we know quantity demanded is 200? Well, at that point, then we're at just one price, so price of 5, and we're saying that it puts us on a point like, let's say, A. And at A, we can read that quantity demanded is 200. All right? So do you see the difference? Demand, we're talking about this whole relationship. We're not talking about a specific price. Whereas quantity demanded, we are talking about a specific price. So does everyone agree that for quantity demanded, we're at a point on a demand curve? So I know exactly what point I'm on this demand curve. So does this distinction make sense to everybody? Okay. So I'm going to be very precise. If I'm talking about demand, then I don't know the particular price we're talking about. If I talk about a particular price, I have to use quantity demanded. Okay? All right. So that then allows us to make another distinction. So let's talk about this one more time before we add on. And that is, we want to talk about a change in demand versus a change in quantity demanded. So a change in demand versus a change in quantity demanded. All right? So a change in demand versus a change in quantity demanded. All right? So a change in demand, we're talking about a shift of the demand curve. So let's draw an increase in demand. If we draw an increase in demand, okay, so if we draw an increase in demand, let's say we're starting with demand curve D0. All right. So we're starting with demand curve D0, and then across all prices, for whatever reason, we like this better than before, so our preferences are stronger, whatever the reason, we're willing to consume more than before at every price. So if I'm willing to consume more than before at every price, then our demand has shifted to the right. So an increase in demand is a shift to the right. And instead, if we're talking about a decrease in demand, I know you already know what this is going to look like, but let's draw it. And you guys notice I'm trying to be careful about labeling my axes. On test 2, you're going to have to be able to draw these kinds of graphs. So you're going to want to remember to label your axes, and notice that I'm also labeling my demand curve. Okay, so there will be points off when you don't label, so don't lose points for silly reasons. So now what we're saying, if we have a decrease in demand at all prices, you don't want as much as before. So maybe your preferences have gotten weaker. So across all prices, you would consume less than before. So I have a new demand curve D1, and it doesn't have to be a parallel shift. So do we agree to increase demand? We're talking about a shift to the right, and a decrease in demand, a shift to the left. Okay? Now, we need to be able to talk about intelligently what would cause this. So guys, what would cause an entire demand schedule to change, where for whatever reason at every price I'm willing to buy more than before? What's the answer? Yeah, a change in those ceteris paribus assumptions, right? A change in ceteris paribus assumptions. So what causes this? A change in ceteris paribus assumptions. Now, we covered this last class period, but it doesn't seem like it quite stuck with everyone. So guys, take a look at this graph. Is this resulting from a change in price? Is that what's causing this? No, that makes no sense, right? Because at every single price, you're willing to buy more, or you want to buy less than before, right? So something else other than price has to be causing this. So this is what we're talking about, things like preferences. That's what we're going to be talking about today, the things that shift demand curves. So that for that reason, guys, our CPAs are also called demand shifters. So I might call them demand shifters. I might call them ceteris paribus assumptions, CPAs. That's the same thing, okay? So demand curve shift because there's a change in one of those things we're holding constant. So I want to be very clear. If we're looking at a demand curve like D0, at D0, we are holding all CPAs constant. So we're holding preferences constant, income constant. All those things that we're going to cover today are held constant along a given demand curve. But we move to D1 because a CPA has changed. So for example, maybe preferences get stronger. All right. Is that making some sense, guys? Is that making a little more sense to you? And again, this is just a mechanic. We have to learn it. There's no great intuition for you. It's just something that you have to kind of begin to understand. Now let's make sure we understand the difference between a change in demand versus a change in quantity demanded. A change in quantity demanded is something like this. Before we said if price equals 5, then quantity demanded is 200. But if price equals 6, what's going to happen to quantity demanded here, guys? What does the law of demand tell us? If price goes up, then is it demand goes down? Quantity demand. Are those interchangeable? Can I say if price goes up, demand goes down? No, demand doesn't shift because of price, right? Does that make sense to everyone? Demand is different. This is quantity demanded. So if price goes up from $5 to $6, then quantity demanded goes down. Maybe it goes down to 160, right? That's a change in quantity demanded, okay? So can we draw this? Sure. But we need to be clear. It's not a change in demand. So we're going to draw a demand curve D0. And that's the only demand curve that's relevant here. Oh, I have no idea what I just did. Hang on a second. Can I get rid of that? Let's see. Ooh, ooh. I don't know if I can. Nope, I can't get rid of that. Sorry. Ignore my squiggle. So if I wanted to illustrate this situation, I need to start with a price of $5. And that puts us at point A. And quantity demanded is 200. Now what do I need to do? How do I illustrate this, guys? How do I illustrate this? I'm simply staying on the same demand curve and sliding which direction? To the left, right? Higher price. So put in a price of 6. That puts us at point B. And 160 are sold. All right. So the change in quantity demanded, guys, is right here. So do you see the difference here? Demand has not shifted here, right? Demand hasn't changed, right? The curve hasn't changed. So I have to be very precise. If I give you a picture like that one on the right and I say demand has decreased, is that accurate? No, what is accurate? I should say what? Quantity demanded has decreased. Everybody with me? And again, for those of you that understand these mechanics very well, I apologize, but we've got to make sure everyone's on board here. Everyone's got to understand this. All right, so then my last question, guys. What causes this? What caused this? What caused us to go from 200 to 160? Yeah, it was caused by a change in price. So I want you to be very clear here about the difference between these two. A change in demand is a shift of the curve. A change in quantity demanded is movement along the curve. Okay, see the difference? Everybody with me? And guys, you just have to know this like the back of your hand. And your homework for last night went pretty well, but you do need to practice because it was a few of these kinds of questions that tripped you up. So you need to go back and get in the habit of looking at the homework and figuring out where you went wrong. All right. So what we're going to talk about today, guys, and this was all review. So if this does not look familiar at all, that's problematic. This is review. We're going to talk about what causes demand to shift. So we're focusing on the left-hand side, the left pictures. What makes demand increase? what makes demand decrease. All right? So let's get started. All right, so demand shifters. Or we could call these ceteris paribus assumptions for demand, because there's going to be some for supply too. So demand shifters, CPAs for demand. All right? Well, the first one we've already talked about, and it's super easy, and that is preferences. When we draw a given demand curve, we assume that preferences are constant. But are preferences really constant in the real world? I mean, at any point in time, your preferences are constant, but preferences are continuously changing. Consumers change their mind about what they like, what they want to spend their money on. So it's very simple. Preferences either get stronger or preferences get weaker. If preferences get stronger, then what we're saying is simply demand goes up. And if preferences get weaker, then demand goes down. It's that simple. So if I asked you to show me or to illustrate, not markets, but just demand, illustrate the demand for station wagons over time. Everyone can draw that, right? So we would probably agree, since we don't see a whole lot of them, producers aren't making them because people don't prefer them like they did. So guys, what should I do with this drawing right here? I should do what? Shift my demand curve to the left, a demand decrease. Good. So I'm going to shift my demand curve to the left. Get in the habit of kind of putting some arrows in for yourself. That will keep you from making silly errors. And we have a demand decrease. Now, remember, we're not talking about markets here. We haven't added supply, and we'll be doing that where we add supply and demand together and we start illustrating markets, but this is just illustrating demand. By the same logic, we could illustrate the demand for SUVs. Seems like those have gone up over time, right? Same maybe with the minivan. So again, starting with demand curve D0, what we're saying is that across prices, people are willing to buy more than before because they like them more than before. If I like something more than before, if I feel strongly about something, I'm willing to pay more, right? So, or I might buy more at the same price. So demand has increased. Now again, I'm not saying that means prices increase because we're not addressing supply, right? We can't claim anything about number of units that are going to be bought or price until we add the supply curve. So we're just looking at demand. But guys, number one, preferences. This is super easy. Everyone agree? So nothing that you need to memorize here, but let me give you a suggestion that will help you keep these straight. If you can think of an example for yourself, that will help you. So for me, it's avocados. I used to hate them. Now I love them. And my demand curve has definitely shifted out for avocados over time. All right. Number one, easy. All right. Number two. Number two. It's a little bit more complex. Number two, income. Income. Now, that seems intuitive, right? People's income certainly would affect how much they buy, right? So that makes sense. But we have one caveat here, and that is that it depends on the kind of good. Now, how many of you are going to go on more vacations after you graduate and you get a professional job? More vacations. Yeah. How many of you are going to dine out more? Yeah. How many of you are going to buy more clothing and shoes? All the ladies got their hands up. All right. How many of you, after you graduate and get a good paying job, are going to eat more ramen noodles? Maybe. I mean, you might. But some of y'all are kind of laughing. It's like, if I never see another ramen noodle again, that'd be great, right? So income doesn't work the same way for every good, right? Some goods work differently. So we have to divide goods into two categories. And that is normal. And it's kind of an unfortunate name because we don't really mean abnormal, but normal and what we call inferior. And again, that's also an unfortunate name because it doesn't necessarily mean it's a horrible product. So normal and inferior. So normal goods, they don't have to be the same for you and for me, but for a lot of us, vacations, dining out, those kinds of things. So let's think about how we would think about vacations and dining out, assuming that that's a normal good for all of us. So if your income, and I'm going to use I for income, so let's make a little note, I for income. If your income went up, do we all agree that we're going to have more vacations and more dining out? And that's across a range of prices, right? We might eat more burgers at Cookout, and we might also eat more steaks at Ruby Tuesdays. So we would say that demand for, let's say, vacations goes up, right? So if my income goes up, the demand for vacations would go up. That makes sense, right? Nothing I have to memorize there. And by the same logic, what if my income goes down? Maybe I decide to go to graduate school, or maybe I get laid off. Don't you agree vacations is going to be one of those first places I cut, right? So makes sense that our demand for vacations will go down, right? So very simple. If it's a normal good, when I have more money in my pocket, I consume more normal goods. My demand for normal goods goes up. So basically, we're simply saying, as income goes up, our demand for normal goods goes up. So as our income goes up, our demand for normal goods goes up. That makes sense. But then we have inferior goods. And inferior goods might be like, for you guys, ramen noodles. Or it could be, for some people, not everybody, used cars. Right? So, again, what's a normal good for you doesn't have to be what's a normal good for me. My husband loves buying that used car, year-old, let somebody else take all that depreciation, right? And so it wouldn't be a normal good. Rather, it wouldn't be an inferior good for him. But let's just say in general. So the way this would work, if our incomes go up, our demand for, we'll use ramen noodles, for ramen noodles goes down. And our demand for used cars goes down, right? Bill Gates probably does not drive a used car. But if my income goes down, so again, maybe I quit my job to go back to graduate school, or I get laid off, those ramen noodles are looking pretty tasty again, am I right? So, sign me up. Ramen noodles for dinner. All right? So the demand for ramen noodles will go up. Everybody with me? So very simple. So what we would say is that as our income goes up, our demand for inferior goods goes down. But we also have to think about the opposite. What happens when income falls, right? So guys, do you need to memorize this, or could you think about something that is a normal good for you? Everyone in their brain, think about what's a normal good for you. Something you're looking forward to consuming more of as you get a professional job, and write it down. And then think about something that's an inferior good for you. It might not be ramen noodles. You might be so excited about the prospect of doubling up on ramen noodles. So instead of 1 pack, you get 2 packs because you got all this money. I don't know. But think about what's an inferior good for you. It could be the Food Lion brand of vegetables and you want to upgrade to Del Monte, whatever it is for you. Okay? Any questions about income? So guys, you're going to have to be careful when I give you questions about income, because either I have to tell you it's a normal or inferior good, or you have to be able to infer. If we're talking about sports cars, do I need to tell you if that's normal or inferior? What are sports cars? Clearly normal, right? All right. Number 3. Number 3 is price of related goods. Price of related goods. Price of related goods. Now again, like with income, I have to think about normal or inferior. I'm going to have 2 different things here. So there are 2 different relationships that we have to think about. So 2 different relationships to consider. Okay. And one relationship is goods can be substitutes, or goods can be complements. Now notice that's complement with an E, not with an I. So complement with an I would be, oh, Dr. Marks, you're like the best thing since sliced bread. And complement means something different, all right? So let's start with the easier of the 2, and that is substitutes. I know that you understand that substitutes are things that you consume instead of each other. So things you consume instead of each other. Things you consume instead of each other. So we might be talking about Sheets gas versus Exxon gas. Right? Those are things that you consume instead of each other. We could be talking about a BMW versus a Mercedes. All right? So things that are tightly related. All right? So let's do an example. Let's say that the price of BMWs falls. The price of BMWs fall. And in the market, BMW and Mercedes are probably pretty close substitutes. Do we agree that a lot of people might be kind of price shopping, looking at both, deciding what they like? So let's say BMW wants to change their strategy. They want to lower the price of BMWs. Is that going to impact Mercedes? Is it? Do you think it's going to change the demand for Mercedes? So what does your gut tell you? If we lower the price of BMWs, what? They sell more BMWs or less BMWs? Yeah, they sell more BMWs. And so what happens to the demand for Mercedes? Demand for Mercedes goes down, right? Demand for Mercedes goes down. But what if it's the opposite? What if the price of BMWs goes up? Well, what does the law of demand tell us? If the price of BMWs goes up, do they Sell more BMWs or less BMWs? Holding all else constant, less BMWs. So if they decide they're going to raise their prices for whatever reason, what happens to the demand for Mercedes? It goes up. You with me? Now, an example that we observe, especially during things like July 4th holiday, might be Coke and Pepsi. So let's do another example. Let's say the price of Coke goes down. Now, does that affect every single person? No, because there's some people that are loyal to one or the other, right? But what if you're throwing a party? You're throwing a barbecue for July 4th. You're getting soda for a whole bunch of people. You might be thinking, well, I'm going to get whatever's cheapest. So price of Coke goes down. Do we agree that that's going to have an impact on the demand for Pepsi? What's going to happen to the demand for Pepsi? It's going to go down. But if price of Coke goes up, they raise their price for whatever reason, don't we agree that the demand for Pepsi is going to go up? Okay? So that's the relationship between goods that are substitutes. And of course, the degree of substitutability matters, right? Coke and Pepsi are really close substitutes. BMW and Mercedes may not be quite as close substitutes. But Coke and Pepsi are definitely close substitutes, and that's why we see that Coke and Pepsi war going on, right? Because they're such close substitutes that any change in price in one will impact the demand for the other, okay? But we also have complements, and complements are things that you consume jointly or together. So complements are things you consume jointly or together. Things you consume jointly or together. So what might be some examples of products that you consume together? When you buy one, you generally buy the other because you like to consume them together. Peanut butter and jelly. All right, so peanut butter and jelly. And somebody said something else? Milk and cereal. Okay. What about coffee and creamer? So you get what I'm talking about, right? Noodles and sauce. So these are complements. So let's think about how complements would work. Let's say that the price of coffee goes down. Price of coffee goes down. Good growing conditions, good weather patterns, price of coffee goes down. So what does the law of demand tell us? What does the law of demand tell us? Not demand for creamer. What does the law of demand tell us? Remember, if the law of demand just is talking about coffee. Price of coffee goes down and what? What does the law of demand tell us, guys? This is important. This is why you got to know these things. It helps you figure things out. So this is going to tell you that the quantity demanded of coffee is going to go up, right? If price of coffee goes down, the quantity demanded goes up. Not demand. Don't give me demand. And it doesn't tell me anything about creamer, right? The law of demand doesn't tell me about creamer. It just says if price of coffee goes down, people buy more coffee. But if people buy more coffee, then what? They need more what? They need more creamer. Good. So the demand for creamer is going to do what here, guys? What's going to happen to the demand for creamer? Go up or down? Up. Good. All right. So do you see how relying on that law of demand is very helpful? Will help me kind of remember what's going on here. All right. So what if instead the price of coffee goes up? Right? So sometimes coffee prices go up because there's frosts, lots of bad weather, crops aren't as productive, and so we do see prices of coffee going up. So if price of coffee goes up, remind me, what does the law of demand say? Quantity demanded of coffee goes down, right? So I'm going to draw a little arrow. So you should too. Remember, this is the law of demand. The law of demand will help you. So That's why it's important we understand it. So price of coffee goes up, which means people have a lower quantity demanded of coffee. So what happens to the demand for creamer? The demand for creamer goes down. Everybody with me? Okay. So again, anything difficult there? No, isn't this very intuitive? But you are going to have to know them all. Okay, but it is very intuitive. All right. Number 4. Number 4. Number 4, we've also already talked about. So number 4 is expectations of future prices. Expectations of future prices. But since we're talking about demand, whose expectations are we talking about? Consumers. Good. Consumers. So we're talking about consumers' expectations of future prices. Okay? Consumers. So we're basically saying, do consumers think prices will increase or decrease in the future? So do consumers think prices will increase or decrease in the future? All right, that's all we're talking about here. So, first case, consumers think, I'll say expect, consumers expect price to increase in the future. So let's say consumers expect price to increase in the future. Now, think about that for a second. You're a consumer, you want to get something, and you think price is going to go up. So what do you want to do? Go get it now, right? You want to get it now. So you don't have to get it in the future. So what this tells us is that demand now is going to go up, right? So I have to divide this into now and later. So demand now is going to go up, and demand in the future, later, is going to go down, right? So I want to get it now before price gets high. So I'm going to increase my demand now and decrease my demand later. What if instead consumers expect price to decrease in the future? If consumers expect price to decrease in the future, then what's going to happen? Then what do I want to do? I want to buy it now or later? Yeah, later, right? I want to wait. So here, demand now is going to go down because I want to wait, and then my demand in the future will go up. All right? Now, this is pretty simple and intuitive, but what's not so easy is me framing problems that will get you to think about this kind of thing. So for it to be something about expectations, we need something like a new law or a new regulation, or maybe some kind of announcement. So for you to be thinking along the lines of expectations, for us to change consumer expectations, I need some kind of announcement. So here might be some examples. Maybe the government announces a higher tariff on good X starting in 1 month. So our government says, hey, we're going to increase the tariff on good X, and it's going to be put in place in 1 month. Now, if you need good X, what are you doing? You're running out and getting good X, right? That's expectations, okay? Something I've changed my thinking about the pattern of prices. Maybe another one. Maybe government announces that they're going to put a fat tax in place on all junk food. Some countries have done this. Starting next year. Now, that tells you the price of your favorite junk foods are going up. Now, I'm not suggesting you're going to go like hoard Pop-Tarts, but might you pick up a few extra boxes of Pop-Tarts? And those other things that you love? Jelly beans, Hershey bars, whatever your junk food is, Cheetos, Fuego Takis, I don't know. Whatever it is for you. You know what I'm talking about? Okay. Another thing might be maybe in the news, it's reported that war in the Middle East will cause gas prices to go up soon. Not immediately, not right now. But in the news, they say, hey, because of war in the Middle East, you should anticipate seeing higher prices for gas at the pump. So what are you doing? Oh, I'm on the road today. I'm going to go fill up my car if I've got room in my tank, right? So do you see all these are things that kind of change expectations of future prices and change yours and my pattern of consumption? Okay? So I have to give you something like that where I create news kind of all at one time for everybody. Does that make sense? So examples are going to have to be along this line. All right. Expectations of future prices. Again, not hard, but you just got to think through it. All right. Number 5. Number 5. Number 5 is simply number of demanders. Number of demanders. Number of demanders. And this is really simple. If there are more demanders, then what happens to demand, guys? If there are more demanders, what happens to demand? It goes which way? Up. So more demanders of good X, demand for good X goes up. And if there are fewer demanders, demanders, then demand goes down. So number of demanders goes up, number of demanders goes down. Really simple. More demanders makes demand go up. Fewer demanders makes demand go down. That's simple. So what might be an example? Well, maybe reports say that the population of high school students will shrink by 30% in the next decade. And we are expecting that to be true. I don't know if it's 30%, but we're going to see a shrinking population of high school students because people, I guess, are having less kids. So how does this affect the demand for college? How will this affect the demand for college, guys? Demand for college will do what? Go down, right? Demand for college will go down. What's the reason? It's not preferences. It's not income. It's not price of complements and substitutes, it's number of demanders going down. So number of demanders decrease, so demand for college will fall. That could hurt enrollment here at Longwood University. All right. So guys, that's all there is to it. But I would urge you, before you put away your notes, guys, good students leave their notes out and continue taking notes till their professors are done. So I would suggest that you do the following. All right. So you're going to need to work towards memorizing these demand shifters. And next class period, we're going to be doing supply and supply shifters. And you need to create yourself a chart and memorize it. So number 1, we talked about preferences. Number 2, we talked about income. But remember, with income, you need to remember you have to divide it into 2 kinds of goods, normal and inferior. Third, we talked about price of related goods. Don't just say related goods, price of related goods, because it's the price that's driving it. So price of related goods. And again, there are 2 relationships that you need to remember, and they are substitutes and complements. Then number 4, we had consumers' expectations of price in the future. Do we think it's going up or down? And number 5, number of demanders. So guys, you have got to come up with a way to memorize those well enough so that you can list them, you could write them, and you're going to have to keep them distinguished from supply shifters, okay? All right, so next class period, supply.